But what do you think the kind of consequences might be across the United States for Muslim people once these comments have been made, which they have been?
Thank you so much for having me. Well, that's a very real concern that's at the top of the minds of the vast majority of American Muslims here in the United States, especially as over recent weeks we've been witnessing unprecedented levels of hate crimes and intolerance towards our communities. His remarks, reckless and irresponsible remarks, come on the heels of these attacks, and so that's something that we're all very concerned about.
Julia Clark, I mean, clearly you've been watching Donald Trump's progress in the polls. Do you think when he made this comment it was something he made on the spur of the moment, or do you think after he made it he got slapped on the back by his advisors who said, you know, good stuff, that's exactly what we need you to be saying?
I don't know, and I don't think I can speak to how well Donald Trump is preparing these remarks carefully. But what I can say is that he knows that they yield the results he's looking for. Trump is, for better or worse, tapping into something in America that's real. There's a nativist tendency. There's a fear among Americans that America is changing, and it's changing in ways they don't like. And Trump has been very effective at speaking to this population, who are, for the most part, Republicans, and they are hearing what he's saying, and they are going to be casting votes accordingly.
Zainab Chowdhury, how familiar are you and your members and those you speak to, how familiar are you with what Julia describes as this nativist wave, this concern among Americans that their country is changing for the worse?
There does seem to be a growing chorus, especially as the debate around the immigrant and refugee crisis was stirred post the Paris terror attacks. We know that Mr. Trump has a history of making these kind of anti-Muslim, Islamophobic remarks in an effort to reach portions of his base who would respond accordingly. We know that yesterday when he made these remarks, there were cheers and people were excited and happy to hear these remarks. And it's very frightening that this kind of bigotry, this kind of intolerance, which is very antithetical to the core values of principle and democracy and freedom that our country was founded upon, would incite this kind of positive reaction from the audience. But I think it speaks to what your other guest was saying, that there is a very real fear within some sects of the American population of this changing demographics that we're seeing here in the United States.
I mean, Zainab, a lot of people have been saying that this plays exactly into the hands of organizations like ISIS that want to divide Western societies. I mean, do you go along with that?
Absolutely. President Obama, in his Oval Office address on Sunday night, he emphasized the need for our country to unite, to set aside our differences, to set aside our fears, and to unite as one people so that we can really address the challenges that we're facing. The kind of rhetoric that Mr. Trump is propagating is really helping to support the platform of terrorist organizations like ISIS, who thrive on this kind of rhetoric to really amplify their own propaganda. They benefit when the West is divided and when Muslims are treated differently, when they're alienated and isolated. They benefit because it helps them boost the support for their own platforms. And essentially that's what Mr. Trump is doing. He's helping to push forward the agenda of terrorist organizations like ISIS.
Julia Clark, I mean, when John McCain took on Sarah Palin as his vice presidential candidate, most people in this country thought that was quite a bit of fun, actually, a sort of cartoon character politician that no one could take seriously and indeed would eventually cripple his campaign. We thought the same way about Donald Trump, and yet he's so persistent and his polls are so persistent that actually it's turning into something else now. People are starting to actually believe that he's got an audience in America that's powerful enough to keep him going.
Indeed, you're correct. When we first saw Trump enter the race in July, he very rapidly ascended to #1 in the polls, and he hasn't dropped since then. Nobody has overtaken him, and that is a little bit unprecedented. I think that's the right word. And I think part of the confusion there is we initially all assumed that this was a style issue, right? People recognized Trump's name, therefore they were going to vote for him, and that would end very quickly. What we're seeing in the polls